My name is Wendy Thornton. I'm 34 years old, and last Thanksgiving my father stood up at the head of the table, raised his glass, and told me I was getting nothing. Around me, my family clapped, actually clapped, while he announced he was selling our three-generation building supply business for $50 million. Then he said the buyer's name out loud, proud as a rooster, rolling it around his mouth like good bourbon. And I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, because I was the only person at that table who knew whose signature was on the other side of that deal. Everyone in my family remembers what I said next. It's become the story they tell in 2 counties. But here's what none of them knows. The part that mattered didn't happen at Thanksgiving. It happened 22 days later, in a room with no turkey, 3 lawyers, and a single folded piece of paper I slid across a table. And what that piece of paper cost me is the real story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally tell the stories their families hoped would stay buried. If you've ever been written off at your own family's table, passed over, talked over, told to go help in the kitchen, this one is for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To picture what $50 million was actually buying, you have to see a hardware store in Millbrook, Ohio, in 1998, through the eyes of a 6-year-old sitting on the counter, Thornton Building Supply. My grandfather Earl opened the first store on Main Street in 1962 with a loan he paid off in nickels. By the time I came along, there were 6 stores and a lumberyard, and the whole town smelled faintly of sawdust because of us. I grew up behind that counter. I counted washers into paper bags before I could read. I learned margins before long division because Grandpa Earl taught math with a price gun. And when the register came up short, it was me he handed the tape to, age 9, because his words. Wendy finds it. She always finds it. He taught me to read a spirit level that same year, holding his old aluminum one steady on the workbench, an $11 tool he'd bought in 1962 and trusted more than most men. You watch the bubble, he said. People will tell you a shelf is straight, a deal is fair, a man is honest, the bubble never lies. I loved that store the way other girls loved horses. I knew every aisle, every vendor rep's coffee order, every squeak in the floor by the paint counter. By 9, I could balance the register on the first pass. It took me 25 more years to learn what I could never balance, no matter how many times I ran the tape. And it wasn't in the drawer. It was standing at the end of the counter in a canvas work apron, teaching my brother to drive the forklift, with his back to me. Nobody in my family ever said out loud that the store would go to my brother. They didn't have to. It was said in 100 quieter ways, the way small towns say everything. When Dale turned 12, Dad took him on delivery runs to learn the routes. When I turned 12, Dad told me I was getting good at keeping things nice and sent me upstairs to help Mom with the church rummage boxes. Dale got a name tag. I got a compliment. Dale broke the pallet jack, and it was part of learning. I reorganized the entire fastener aisle by thread size one summer, and Dad walked through it, nodded once, and asked Dale if he'd eaten. There was a schedule board in the back of the warehouse, a big whiteboard grid with every employee's name down the side. Full-timers, part-timers, the high school kid who swept on Saturdays. Everyone who belonged to the store was on that board. In 20 years, through every summer I worked there for free, my name was never written on it. Not once. I used to stand in the warehouse and look at that grid the way other people look at family photos they're not in. And I want to be fair, because fair matters to me. My father was never cruel. He never mocked me, never raised his voice at me, never once made me cry at that counter. He did something quieter and, I'd argue, more expensive. He exempted me. From the work, from the weight, from the will. From all of it. Like a tax I was too pretty to pay. He genuinely believed that was love. It would take me almost 30 years, and a lawyer's conference room in December, to understand what it actually was. The year I turned 25, the store started dying. A Home Depot went up 20 minutes away in Riverton, and you could watch our parking lot thin out month by month like a hairline. Dad's answer was to work harder at the same things. Open earlier, sweep cleaner, trust the loyalty of contractors who were already quietly opening accounts at the big box. I had just finished my MBA at night, 3 years of classes after full days doing the store's books, which by then I was doing unpaid and unlisted, like a ghost with a calculator. And I did the thing hopeful daughters do. I wrote a plan. 30 pages. I still remember the sections. Shift the business from walk-in retail to contractor delivery, sign the builders on subscription accounts, put the inventory on actual software instead of Dale's memory, and use the lumberyard as a distribution hub for 3 counties. I printed it at the library and bound it with a black spine and put it on my father's desk on a Tuesday in April, and I stood there while he read it, the way you stand for a verdict. He read 3 pages, maybe 4. Then he squared the edges, set it down on the blotter, and looked at me with something close to kindness, which is the part I've never forgiven, and said, "Hardware isn't for girls, Wendy." Then he asked if I could run lunch out to Dale at the yard. I don't remember driving the sandwiches over. I remember Dale eating them on a stack of treated lumber, talking about a truck he wanted. Within a year, I was gone. Columbus, 90 minutes and one entire universe down the interstate. The plan stayed behind on his desk. To this day, I couldn't tell you what happened to those 30 pages. Hold that thought, it comes back. I moved to Columbus with $12,000 in savings, a laptop with a cracked lid, and a theory. If my father wouldn't run his supply chain on software, other men's fathers might. I named the company Everest Holdings, and I'll tell you the embarrassing truth about the name. It wasn't ambition. It came from a night in the store when I was little, when Grandpa Earl looked at a misstacked delivery towering by the dock and said, "Somebody's got to climb that mountain, and it's always us." Everest builds inventory and delivery software for building suppliers and contractors. In other words, I sold my father's rejected 30 pages, one feature at a time, to every hardware man in the Midwest except him. The first year I made almost nothing and slept in the office twice a week. The 5th year we passed 100 employees. By last year we were in 1,100 supply houses across 30 states, and I still drove a 9-year-old truck because money never was the point and spending it felt like admitting something. Here's the part I'm less proud of. I built that company like a fortress. No partners with real power, no mentors, no one close enough to tell me no. My chief financial officer once said, not unkindly, that I ran Everest like a woman who'd been robbed once and now slept on top of the safe. I told him that was ridiculous. Then I went home to a house I'd bought alone, ate dinner alone, and reviewed the quarter alone, feeling perfectly safe and perfectly certain that needing people was a weakness I'd been smart to cut out early. If nobody's allowed to help you, nobody gets to refuse you. That was my arithmetic. For 9 years it added up beautifully, right up until the teaser landed in our deals inbox. You should know what my family and I were to each other by then, because it wasn't estrangement, exactly. It was something politer and sadder. My mother, Carol Ann, called every Sunday at 4, and we talked about her tomatoes and my weather, never the store, by unspoken treaty. I drove up to Millbrook twice a year, Easter and Thanksgiving, and sat at the far end of the table like a well-dressed roomer. Dale was vice president of operations by then, a title Dad invented for him the way you'd hang a medal on a boy for attending. He'd gotten louder with age. His wife Krista had a gift for compliments with a hook in them. Look at you, Wendy. Still so busy. Some people bring casseroles and some people bring ambition. I brought pie and said little. What I noticed, those visits, was the store bleeding. You can dress a company up for family dinner same as a person. The empty end caps, the vendor reps who stopped coming, 2 registers dark on a Saturday. I noticed Dale's new truck too, and did quiet math I kept to myself. Then, one Sunday in August, in the middle of the tomato report, my mother lowered her voice like the kitchen had ears and said, "Your dad met some men in suits on Tuesday. At the store, after close. He wore his funeral jacket. Suits. In Millbrook, after close." I said something soothing, and got off the phone and sat very still. My mother thought it was bankers, and feared it. I ran a software company that served 400 supply houses in Ohio alone, and I knew the difference between bankers and brokers. Somebody wasn't borrowing money to save the store. Somebody was measuring it for a casket. The teaser arrived in Everest's acquisitions inbox on a Thursday in September. That's how these things work. When a business goes up for sale quietly, the broker sends a 2-page anonymous summary to a list of likely buyers. No company name, just numbers and a code name. This one was called Project Timber. Regional building supply chain, 6 retail locations plus lumberyard, roughly $85 million in annual revenue, 240 employees, founder-owned, motivated seller. Strategic buyers in vertical software were on the list, which is how it came to us. I read 2 lines of it and knew every squeak in its floors. You don't forget the shape of your own childhood, even redacted. Grant Ellison, my head of acquisitions, walked in with the same pages and said, "This one's in your backyard, boss. Worth a look?" And I heard myself say, in a voice I didn't fully recognize, "Yes, but I stay off the calls. Here's where I owe you honesty, because this is the hinge of everything." I told Grant it was standard practice. Anonymity keeps negotiations clean, keeps the seller from playing games with the price. That's true, and brokers run confidential deals every day of the week, but that's not why I did it. I hid my name because a hidden name can't be handed back. If my father knew who was reaching for the store, he could do to the offer what he did to the 30 pages. Square its edges, set it down, send it out for sandwiches. Anonymous? I couldn't be refused. That was the fortress logic again, and I mistook it, as always, for professionalism. So Everest signed the NDA, bid through a company called Acquisition LLC, and somewhere in Millbrook my father started telling my mother things were finally turning around. Neither of them had any idea. We were not the only bidder, but we were the only serious one. A supply chain bleeding customers in a county with a Home Depot is not a bidding war, it's a rescue negotiation. Grant's team did it clean, $50 million, a number I set personally and defended against my own analysts who wanted to open at 41. They called the premium irrational. I called it strategic geography and closed the discussion because the chairman gets to do that, and because none of them knew they were pricing my grandfather's front door. In the middle of November, the letter of intent was signed. Non-binding. That matters later, so file it away. But signed. My father shook Grant's hand across a conference table in Dayton and, Grant told me afterward, gripped it hard and said, "Tell your people they're buying the best run yard in Ohio." The best run yard in Ohio. Even then, selling, he was still grading his own paper. That night my mother called, off schedule, a Tuesday. Her voice had bells in it. "You're coming for Thanksgiving? Please say yes. Your dad has news." "Good news, honey. The first good news in years. He's been walking around whistling." I said yes. I hung up. And I sat in my kitchen in Columbus for a long time with my tea going cold, turning over the strangest, stupidest, most human thought I'd had in 9 years. He sounds proud. I wonder who he thinks he's proud of. Some part of me, the part that still owned a 9-year-old's ears, genuinely believed that somehow, at that table, the pride might land on me. You can build a company in 30 states and still drive 90 minutes north hoping for a pat on the head. I set the table for it and everything. Before I walk you into that dining room, if you've ever sat at a table where your chair was a courtesy, where you were family in the photos but staff in the decisions, tell me in the comments where you were sitting when you figured it out. And subscribe, because what my father announced over the turkey is only the third most shocking thing that happens in this story. Now, Thanksgiving, my parents' house in Millbrook, the good tablecloth, 11 people. My mother had been cooking since Tuesday and it showed. My father had been rehearsing since the letter of intent, and that showed too. He wore a collared shirt at his own table. He kept touching his water glass and not drinking. Dale arrived loud in a new coat, with the swagger of a man who has seen a number with 7 zeros and believes some of them are his. Krista appraised my dress like an insurance adjuster and said it was brave. The little cousins watched football. Aunt Lou brought her famous rolls. It could have been any Thanksgiving from the last 30 years, if the air hadn't been humming like a power line. I knew what was coming, of course. I'd known for 11 days, ever since a signature page crossed my desk with my father's name on it, above the line, Seller, in the blue fountain ink he's used my whole life. I had decided, coldly, professionally, the way I decided everything back then, to say nothing at dinner. Let him announce. Let the deal close in January. Tell the family afterward, gently, through lawyers and letters, once nothing could be squared up and set down and refused. That was the plan. And I want it on the record that I walked in that door intending to keep it. The same way I want it on the record that plans made by the fortress only survive until somebody fires at the gate. My father stood up between the turkey and the pie and tapped his glass with his wedding ring, twice. "Family," he said, "I have an announcement." My mother reached for his hand. He didn't notice. "I've made a decision about the business. We're selling. It's done. Papers are moving. $50 million. The number landed on that table like a flock of birds. Aunt Lou actually gasped. Dale was on his feet before the echo died, whooping, pumping Dad's hand, and Krista's eyes went bright and quick, already spending. My mother said, "Frank," in a small voice, and got no further because my father wasn't finished. He turned. To me. And I watched him gather himself up the way he did the day of the 30 pages. That same terrible kindness settling over his face like weather, and he said, "Wendy, I want to say this to you plain, in front of everybody, so there's no lawyers and no whispering later. The proceeds go to the people who built this business. Your brother put in the years. You left." He paused, and the pause was worse than the sentence. "You're getting nothing." Dale clapped. He clapped. Krista lifted her glass and said something about how honesty was refreshing, and down the table my mother's spoon slipped out of her fingers and rang against her plate like a small wrong bell, and nobody picked it up. I sat still. I'd like to tell you the calm was strength. It wasn't. Not yet. It was arithmetic failing. I had $50 million committed on paper to this man, and the sentence "you're getting nothing" was still doing to my chest exactly what it would have done when I was 9. That's the thing nobody tells you about wounds like this. You can outrun the will. You can outbuild the store. You cannot out-earn a father's arithmetic. You can only stop being a line in it. I didn't know that yet. I unfolded my napkin, smoothed it flat, and asked my question. "Dad," I said, and my voice came out level, which surprised me more than anyone. "Who's the buyer?" It was the one question nobody at that table had thought to ask. They'd all jumped straight from 50 million to what it meant for them. Not one of them had wondered whose money it was. My father straightened. This was the part he'd been rehearsing. I could tell, because he set his shoulders the way he did for the Rotary Club. "Outfit out of Columbus," he said. "Software people, if you can believe it. Big. They've been buying up the industry." He let it build, savoring it, the salesman's pause of a man who has waited 3 bad years to feel impressive at his own table. "Everest Holdings. They're paying 50 million. And then, I'll give him this," he added the line that made it art. "They know a well-run operation when they see one." Around the table, the name meant nothing. Dale nodded like a man hearing a sports score. Krista mouthed Everest at her wine. My mother was still looking at her drop spoon, and I sat at the far end with my hands in my lap, feeling something enormous and very quiet rearrange itself in my chest. Blood in my ears like surf. Because here is what I knew, and the turkey didn't. There is no outside board at Everest Holdings. There's a chairman who owns the controlling stake, who signs what she chooses to sign, whose name stays off the deal calls as a matter of practice. I had 90 seconds, maybe less, to choose between the plan, smile, say congratulations, tell them in January through lawyers, and the truth. My father picked up his glass. "To the buyer," he said, beaming. "Whoever they are?" "Well?" he asked. "Dad," I said, into the toast, "I am Everest Holdings." There is a specific quality to the silence that follows a sentence like that, and I've had a year to find the words for it. It's the silence of a room recalculating. 11 people, 11 abacuses, all the beads sliding at once. Dale laughed first. One bark, the laugh of a man declining a fact. Good one, Wen. I didn't answer him. I kept my eyes on my father, who had not moved, whose glass was still raised like a man frozen mid-ceremony, and I said it again, slower, the way you read numbers to the bank. Everest Holdings is my company, Dad. I founded it 9 years ago. I own it. Acquisition. That's my signature your broker has been carrying to Dayton. Krista had her phone out by then, thumbs blurring, and I watched her find it. The company site, the little corporate bio page we'd always kept deliberately gray. Founder and chairman, W. Thornton. She didn't say anything. She just turned the phone toward Dale, and Dale stopped being loud for the first time in my adult life. His face did something complicated. Disbelief, then belief, then math. The 50 million, the whooping, the toast. All of it rerouting through the sister he'd clapped at. My mother put her hand over her mouth, and above it her eyes were doing something I couldn't read yet. It would take me weeks to name it, and when I did, it would break my heart a little. She looked like a woman watching a collision she'd been bracing for since 1998. And my father lowered his glass, 1 inch at a time, and said the sentence I will be quoting to therapists for the rest of my life. Not how, not when, not why, didn't you tell me? He looked at his daughter, chairman of the company paying him $50 million, and he said quietly, "Is this a joke you bought?" As if the only way I could hold something this size was as a prank. As if even now, the largest check of his life couldn't have a girl's name on it. Nobody ate the pie. My father left his own table before the coffee, and the front door clicked, and the porch light stayed off. I found him the next morning at the store. Of course the store, closed for the holiday, but his truck out front like always, the side door unlocked. He was in the back warehouse, under the old fluorescents, standing at Earl's workbench with his coffee going cold on the vise, and he didn't turn around when my boots crossed the concrete. For a while we just stood there in the sawdust smell, two people who had never once in 34 years had the conversation we were about to not have. On the pegboard above the bench, the schedule board still hung. Same grid, new names, the high school kid who sweeps on Saturdays. My name still wasn't on it. Some things stay level forever. Then my father reached into the drawer of the workbench, the shallow one that sticks, and took out my grandfather's spirit level. Aluminum, dented at one end, the little window gone honey-colored with age. He held it out flat on both palms like something ceremonial. "Your grandfather paid $11 for this in 1962, he said. "Everything square in this building got squared with it. 60 years. Every shelf, every doorframe, every addition." I reached for it. I couldn't help it. My hands moved on their own, and he drew it back. Not sharply, gently, which was worse. "I'm showing you," he said. "Not giving." He set it back in the drawer and slid the drawer shut, and the stick of the wood was the only sound in the building. $50 million, he said to the workbench, "and you couldn't come to me with your own name." And the terrible thing, the thing I chewed on for the whole 90 minutes back to Columbus, was that he wasn't entirely wrong about that. He'd refused my name for 25 years. I'd stopped offering it. Somewhere between his sin and mine, an $11 tool sat in a stuck drawer, waiting to find out which of us could read it. Monday morning, my father called his broker and told him to find another buyer. Hargrove, a decent man with an indecent job, called Grant, who walked into my office with the look pilots get when an engine light comes on. "The seller is entertaining a competing offer," Grant said, in deal voice, and then in human voice. "Wendy, he'd rather take less money from strangers." The strangers had a name. Corestone Partners, out of Chicago. If you've never met a liquidation firm, count your blessings. Corestone doesn't buy businesses, it buys carcasses and sells the cuts. Their offer came together with insulting speed. 46 million, 4 less than mine. And their plan wasn't a secret, because plans like theirs never are. Sell the real estate under 4 of the 6 stores. close them, keep the lumberyard and the delivery contracts, and right-size the workforce, which is a phrase that should be illegal. 240 employees. I'd grown up underfoot of half of them. Miss Dottie at the paint counter, who kept butterscotch in her smock for me before I could see over it. Ray in the yard, 29 years, who taught Dale the forklift and taught me too, quietly, after close. Because I asked, and Dale didn't. Under Corstone's math, most of them had 18 months. And my father, a man who knew every one of their kids' names, was willing to sign it, because the alternative was endorsing a check with his daughter's name behind it. He would rather it die in a stranger's hands than live in his daughter's. He never said those words. He said it in broker language. Exploring strategic alternatives. Same sentence. That was the week this stopped being a family story and became something with civilians in it. Whatever I felt about my father, Miss Dottie hadn't done anything to anybody, except trust the name on the sign. I taped her butterscotch wrapper, I still had one, don't ask, to the corner of my monitor, and told Grant we weren't withdrawing. Due diligence is the unglamorous heart of any acquisition. Your accountants crawl through the seller's numbers to confirm the business is what the brochure says. In the first week of December, ours found the hole. Melanie from our deal team flagged it first. Vendor balances that didn't reconcile against the aging report the broker had provided. She pulled thread after thread, and what unspooled was this: $4.1 million in past due supplier debt that appeared nowhere in the seller's financials. Invoices shuffled between entities, credit extensions signed quietly with vendors, extensions with my brother's signature on them, because 2 years ago, when Dad's eyes got bad, he'd handed Dale the books. It wasn't embezzlement. Dale hadn't pocketed a dime. It was worse, in a way. It was a drowning man hiding the water. Every quarter the store sank deeper, and every quarter Dale smiled at Sunday dinner and told Dad the yard was turning around, and signed another quiet extension, and moved the hole one column over. My father was selling a company he believed was worth $50 million, and it was thoroughly, provably not. And he had no idea, because the son he'd given the books to had been redecorating them. I sat with that folder alone in my office until the cleaning crew came through. Understand what was in my hands. Disclosed, the debt would detonate both deals. Corstone would slash their offer or walk and sue. My father would learn his heir had cooked the family books. Dale could face fraud claims from 2 directions. Read out loud, in the right room, that folder would hand me the store at a crawlspace price, and hand my father a humiliation so total he'd never grade another paper of mine again. Leverage. Real. Legal. Documented leverage, the exact currency my family had traded in my whole life, secrets, held quietly, spent at the right moment. For one long night, I sat with a folder that could end the war in an afternoon. All I had to do was read it out loud. Quick pause, because I want this on your conscience too. That folder is still in my safe. Before you find out what I did with it, tell me in the comments what you would have done. Read it to the room, or slide it across the table. Your answer says more about your family than mine. And subscribe if you haven't, because the next 20 minutes of this story cost me more than the $50 million. Now, the folder wasn't my only problem. Everest is mine, but $18 million of the deal money wasn't. It came from a growth fund that had backed us for years. Patient money, professional money. And professional money reads due diligence reports. The Monday after Melanie's findings went in the data room, the fund called a meeting that had exactly one agenda item, delivered by a man named Whitfield, who wears his glasses on his forehead so you know he's serious. We're not paying $50 for a company with a $4 million hole. Nobody sane is. Their terms for staying in: cut the offer to 41 and commit to closing 3 of the 6 stores, the underperformers, meaning Main Street first. I looked at their term sheet, and honest to God, for a second I admired it. It was Corstone's plan wearing our logo. Same surgery, better bedside manner, and that's when I finally understood the shape of the trap I'd built myself into. Every rational path to owning my family's store ran through gutting it, through doing to Miss Dottie and Ray precisely what I was spending $50 million to prevent. The want was eating itself. Win like a buyer, lose the store. Walk like a daughter, lose it too. I told Whitfield I'd consider the terms, which was a lie I delivered in fluent Chairman. And I drove home with his term sheet on the passenger seat like a hitchhiker I regretted picking up. My house was dark when I got there. Big, tasteful, paid for, dark. Fortresses usually are. I called Whitfield back Wednesday morning and declined. He was gracious about it, the way surgeons are gracious. Then we're out, Wendy. This is a rescue, not a deal, and we don't fund rescues. By Friday, the paperwork was signed, and $18 million stood up from my table and put on its coat. Grant sat across from me in the empty conference room afterward and asked the sane question: "Do we walk?" And I told him the truth for the first time in the entire transaction. Not strategic geography, not vertical integration. I told him about the counter and the register tape and the schedule board, about a 30-page plan and a spirit level in a stuck drawer, and Grant, who has negotiated against sharks and cried at zero of it, listened all the way through and said quietly, "You know this deal stopped making sense 2 weeks ago." And I said, "It stopped being a deal the day he said I built none of it." Which wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. It was a diagnosis. Here's what I can tell you from the far side. There is a moment in every long grief where you have to decide whether you're finishing something because it's right, or because the 9-year-old holding the register tape won't let go of your sleeve. I couldn't tell the difference yet. Standing in that conference room, minus 18 million, with a liquidator circling and a folder in my safe that could end everything, I genuinely could not tell. So I did what people like me do when we can't answer the big question. I answered a small one instead. Could the deal still close without the fund? Yes, if I bet the fortress. Which brings us to the 10th of December, and the worst signature of my life. Almost the worst. Second worst. Before the signature, the visitor. On the 8th of December, my assistant buzzed to say Dale Thornton was in the lobby. No appointment. My brother had never once in 9 years come to Columbus. He looked wrong in my building. Too big for the chair, coat still on, eyes doing inventory of the place like a man pricing what his sister's life must have cost. I want to tell you he came to apologize. What he actually did was close the door, sit down across from me, and negotiate. He knew what our accountants had found. Of course he knew. He'd watched the document requests circle his own signatures for a week like gulls. And his offer, stripped of 40 minutes of sweating and family loyalty speeches, was this. I keep quiet about the 4.1 million, and in exchange, he works on Dad, gets him to drop Corestone and let me buy the store. I can deliver him, Dale said, actually leaning back, actually recovering a little swagger. He listens to me, that's worth something, right? My brother selling me our father's ear priced in silence. And here's what I felt, watching him. Not rage, recognition. He was drowning exactly the way the store was drowning. Quietly, respectably, moving the whole one column over, because he'd been handed a thing he never earned by a man who confused handing with love, and he'd spent 2 years lying rather than say the one sentence that could have saved him. I can't do this. In my family, you'd sooner drown. I said no. Both halves. No to the silence, and no, for now, to exposing him, which confused him badly. Then what do you want? He asked, and for once in his loud life he sounded 9 years old too. I told him the truth. For it to end clean, Dale, one of us has to stop playing the family game. Watch me. On the 10th of December, in Ruth Calloway's office on the 14th floor, I signed a personal guarantee. Plain English. To replace the fund's 18 million I borrowed against everything that was actually mine, my controlling shares in Everest and the house in Columbus, the first thing I ever bought that no one could take back. If the deal closed and the store recovered, fine. If it didn't, the bank owned my fortress. Both meanings. Ruth, who has the warmth of a staple gun and the loyalty of one too, made me read every page aloud, which is her way of making sure clients hear themselves. Halfway through the collateral schedule, my phone lit up on the table. Mom. I watched it ring itself out. Kept reading. Signed. Then I called her back from the parking garage, sitting in my truck with the engine off, and she was crying before she got a sentence finished. Your father hasn't slept since Thanksgiving. He walks the house at 3 in the morning. Wendy, he keeps saying he'd rather bury that store than hand it over. Bury it. To your own daughter. Who says that? A man following his level, I didn't say. A man squaring a shelf with the only tool he was ever given. I told her it would be over soon, one way or the other, which comforted neither of us. And after she hung up, I sat in the concrete dark for a while, doing the honest math. The house, the shares, the folder, the liquidator, the 19th of December. There was no version left where I could shrug and go back to my life. My life was now collateral, listed by address, in a document I'd read out loud in my own voice. The fortress was in the deal. Everything was on the table but the one thing I'd wanted on it since I was 9. 3 days before closing, Hargrove, bless the man's procedural little heart, invited both bidders' teams to a final walkthrough at the flagship store. Standard for competing offers, brutal in practice. I went in person. My father didn't look at me once, which took visible effort, like a man not scratching a bite. And I stood in aisle 5 of my childhood while a 29-year-old Cornerstone associate named Braden walked my father through their value realization roadmap, out loud in the store, with staff on the registers pretending not to hear. Braden had a laser pointer. He aimed it at the ceiling of the building Earl Thornton paid off in nickels and talked about footprint rationalization. He said the Main Street location, this location, the 1962 location, was a natural first divestment, prime corner, strong redevelopment comps. He said the workforce carried meaningful redundancy, and he said it in front of Miss Dottie, who is not redundant, who is load-bearing, who kept butterscotch in her smock for a lonely kid 30 years ago. I watched my father during that pitch, and here's what I saw. Because I've spent a lifetime reading the weather on that face. He flinched. At divestment, his jaw moved. At the laser dot on Earl's ceiling, his hand found the edge of a shelf. The way you touch something to confirm it's still there. He was hearing, for the first time in the flesh, what strangers actually meant. And his pride stood there and took it, because in his arithmetic, even this beat the alternative. He shook Braden's hand. On my way out, past the paint counter, Miss Dottie caught my sleeve and pressed something into my palm without a word. Butterscotch. 2 of them. Whatever room I walked into 3 days later, I was going to be carrying those. The night before closing, I laid it all out on my kitchen table like a surgeon's tray. Left side, the Everest purchase agreement, execution copy, flagged where signatures went. Right side, a printout of Cornerstone's term sheet, the one my father was scheduled to sign at 2 the following afternoon if our 10 o'clock came to nothing. And in the middle, the folder. $4.1 million of my brother's quiet drowning, tabbed and highlighted in Melanie's tidy hand. I'm going to be straight with you about that night, because this channel is where I don't perform. I rehearsed reading it out loud. I did. Standing at my kitchen counter at 1 in the morning, I practiced the sentences. Gentlemen, before anyone signs anything, you should know what the seller's own numbers are hiding. And in the rehearsal, I watched Cornerstone's lawyers pack their bags, watched my father's face cave in, watched Dale's name come apart in front of the men whose respect he'd inflated himself for. Total victory. I had it memorized in 2 passes. And then I thought about the drawer that sticks. My whole family ran on exactly this fuel, things known and not said, spent at the moment of maximum damage, Dad hiding the sale until he could unveil it, Dale hiding the whole, me hiding my name inside an LLC. 3 generations of people who would rather hold a secret than hold each other, and every one of us calling it strength. If I read that folder to the room, I'd win the store by being the best Thornton in history at the family sport. The bubble sat dead center on that thought and would not move. There are 2 ways to walk into a room holding a bomb. I chose the one my grandfather would have recognized. December 19th, 10 in the morning, the long conference room at Whitmore & Katz in Millbrook. My father's lawyers, small town solid. Frost on the parking lot, coffee in a pump thermos nobody touched. Around the table, Frank Thornton in his funeral jacket. Dale, gray as drywall mud. Hargrove the broker, their attorney. Ruth Calloway and her junior associate, Grant. Me. Too many chairs, and silence you could stack. My father opened the proceedings by not opening them. "I'm here as a courtesy," he said, to the room over my head. "Cornerstone signs at 2 o'clock. I'm told it's proper to hear the standing offer out first." Proper. He was going to sit through his daughter's $50 million offer for Manners, then drive across town and sell his father's name to a laser pointer, $4 million cheaper, out of spite dressed up as principal. Rather bury it than hand it over. Ruth reached for the purchase agreement to begin. I put my hand flat on it. Not yet. The room watched me open my own case and take out, instead, a single sheet of paper, folded once, Melanie's summary, the totals and the signature dates. No exhibits, no theater. The full folder stayed in my bag. It never came out. It never will. I slid the folded page across the table, past the thermos, and stopped it in front of my father. Nobody else could see what it was. "Read it," I said. "Just you." Dale made a sound. A small one. The sound a man makes when the elevator drops an inch. Because he didn't know what was on that paper. But he knew his sister's face, and he knew his own ledger. My father looked at me for a long moment, the first direct look since Thanksgiving, trying to find the trap in it. Then he unfolded the page and read. And I watched 3 bad years and 1 terrible son land on him line by line, and I want you to know I took no pleasure in it. That's not virtue talking. It's just true. My father aged a decade in the time it took to read half a page. His eyes went down the columns once, then again. A bookkeeper's son, checking the tape, and his hand came up slowly and covered his mouth. And above it, for one unguarded second, I saw the register fail. "The yard is turning around," Dale's Sunday voice, 2 years of it, recounted against $4.1 million of quiet vendor paper with his boy's signature at the bottom. "What is that?" Dale said, too fast. Nobody answered. "Dad, what did she give you?" And that's when my brother broke. Not because anyone accused him, but because the silence did, the way silence always ran our family. He stood up, chair squealing, and it poured out of him in front of both sets of lawyers. The extensions, the shuffled invoices, the drowning. Pitched first as strategy, then as sacrifice. Then, as his voice climbed and cracked, as the thing it actually was. I was handling it. You gave me the books and a dyeing store and Home Depot, and I was handling it. What was I supposed to say that I couldn't? To you. He was shouting at our father and pointing at me. She left. She got to leave. I stayed and drowned in it, and everyone clapped for me while I went down. He stopped. Heard himself. Everyone clapped for me. The room held perfectly still, 3 lawyers studying their legal pads with tremendous professional interest, and my brother sat back down in pieces. 40 minutes of swagger gone, just a big gray man in a coat he'd bought for a windfall that was never coming. I said nothing the entire time. Voice restraint isn't a technique, whatever this channel makes it look like. At the true center of your life, it's just this. There is nothing to add. The truth had finally stood up at a Thornton table and introduced itself, and for once, none of us had hidden it in a drawer. My father folded the page back along my crease. Then he looked at me and asked what I wanted. Here's what I could have said. With that page face up and Cornerstone 2 hours out, I could have recut my offer to 35 and he'd have taken it. His own lawyer would have made him. I could have demanded the apology, the public one, itemized, the plan, the board, the sandwiches. I had him square in the one position he'd never allowed me, needing my next sentence. 25 years of arithmetic, ready to settle at last in my favor. And standing in all that leverage, I finally saw it for what it was. The family sport, championship round, and me with the best secret at the table. My grandfather's bubble sat dead center. So this is what I actually said. And my voice stayed level the whole way, which I'm told made it worse and better at once. Here's my last offer, Dad. Same deal. 50 million. Same number I offered when I thought the books were clean. I know about the hole now, and I'm paying anyway, because the name on that sign is worth more to me than the truth is worth as a weapon. I laid out the two conditions, slowly, so the lawyers could write them down. Every one of the 240 employees keeps their job for a minimum of 3 years. In writing, in the agreement. And the name stays on the sign. Thornton. Not Everest. Then I gave him the honest ledger because he of all men deserved to be sold to square. The fund was gone. The shortfall was mine, borrowed against my shares and my house. There was no cushion behind me and no board above me. You'd be selling to your daughter, I said, and everything she owns. That's the whole offer. It doesn't get better at 2 o'clock. It just gets 4 million smaller and 240 people meaner. Somewhere out past the frosted glass, a delivery truck backed out of the lot with its sweet, stupid, ordinary beeping. Some driver with a route to run, a kid's dentist to pay for, no idea his next 3 Decembers were on this table. My father listened to the whole thing with his hand still resting on that folded page. Then he said, "Why?" Not a question mark even. Flat. Why? After everything. And I gave him the only answer I had left. You told me I was getting nothing, I said. You were right. Nothing is what I built with. It turns out it's enough, if you start early. Nobody laughed. It wasn't that kind of line, and anyway, it wasn't for the room. My father took his glasses off and pinched the bridge of his nose, and when he spoke, it was to the table, in a voice I'd never heard him use, older than his own father's. I sat where you're sitting once, he said. 1989. Earl had a buyer for the yard. Actual money would have set us all up. I talked him out of it at this same firm, maybe this same room, because I couldn't stand for it to go to strangers. He looked up at me. I just didn't have the money to buy my way out of his opinion. You did. That's the whole difference between us, Wendy. 1 generation of money. It is the closest thing to an apology I have ever received from Frank Thornton, and it wasn't one. And I've decided it doesn't matter. He put his glasses back on. He asked his lawyer 2 questions, good ones, about the employment guarantee and the name covenant. And then my father, 63 years old, second of his line, wrong about me for exactly as long as I'd been alive, picked up the pen and signed the Everest Agreement like a man setting down something heavy at the end of a long carry. No speech, no tears. The lawyers countersigned and time-stamped and did lawyer things, and Corstone's 2 o'clock evaporated somewhere over the parking lot. And as the room stood and exhaled and reached for the untouched coffee, Frank Thornton did the one thing his language allowed. He reached into the pocket of his funeral jacket, which had been hanging wrong all morning, and now I knew why, and took out Earl's spirit level and slid it across the conference table to me, dented end first, without a single word. Loop closed. I put my hand over it, and the aluminum was warm from being carried against his chest, and neither of us said anything at all. And it was the most either of us had ever said. It's April now. The sign over Main Street says, Thornton Building Supply, fresh paint. Same name. That was in the contract. But I'd have done it anyway. We run the delivery and subscription model out of the lumberyard, the 30-page plan with 9 years of software behind it, and March was the first month in 4 years the company didn't lose money. Not made. Didn't lose. In this business, in this town, that's a parade. The first promotion list I ever signed had 2 women from the warehouse on it, Raina and Big Sue, both of whom had been training their own supervisors for a decade. Nobody made a speech about it. The schedule board in the back has everybody's name on it now, including, in the top corner, in my own handwriting, mine. 26 years late. Still counts. Dale resigned the week after closing. We didn't prosecute and we didn't announce. The debt was disclosed to the bank, restructured, and is being paid down. His part of it comes back to the family in installments, on paper, with his signature, which Ruth insisted on and which I think was the first honest arithmetic of his adult life. He's selling equipment out of Riverton. He waves at me in traffic now, which is more than we managed for 9 years. Krista returned the new coat. My mother calls on Sundays and talks about tomatoes, and about my father, who has developed, at 63, a habit nobody assigned him. He shows up Saturday mornings, punches nothing, reports to no one, and quietly squares the store. Fixes a hinge, faces the fastener aisle, walks the floor with his coffee like a retired captain who can't sleep on land. We don't discuss the deal. We discuss inventory. Last Saturday he stood watching the loading dock for a while and said, not quite to me, Earl would have liked the trucks. And I said, he'd have hated the software. And my father laughed. One short, rusty sound, like a drawer coming unstuck. I keep the level on my desk in the Millbrook office, bubble dead center. The house in Columbus is still the bank's until it isn't. The fortress money is gone into lumber and payroll and 3-year guarantees, and I have never in my life been so far out over my skis, or slept so well. Some nights I stay late and walk the aisles alone, pass the paint counter, and eat a butterscotch, and let the floor squeak at me in all the old places. You can't buy your childhood back. I checked. But it turns out you can buy it forward. Here is the one thing I know now that I didn't know at that Thanksgiving table. I spent 9 years building a company that was really a 9-year application for my father's approval. And the first paper I ever signed for myself was the one everybody in the room said would ruin me.